Have you ever wanted to take your Amiga or Commodore 64 on the go? Well, this is a handheld solution that actually exists and works. I'm Matt D'Amico, and welcome to episode 42 of Retro Bits. Over the years, Commodore enthusiasts have been teased with renderings and mock-ups of various handheld systems that turned out to be nothing more than vaporware. None of these products ever came to market, although a number of die-hard fans did create their own bespoke portables. I have good news because a handheld solution does exist, and it starts with one of these. The Nintendo 3DS was released in 2011 and featured a 268 MHz dual-core ARM CPU, dedicated graphics processor, 128 MB of RAM, 3 cameras, 2 LCD screens, wireless networking, and up to 5 hours of battery life. The 3DS came in a variety of form factors, with later models being fitted with an 800 MHz quad-core ARM CPU, 256 MB of RAM, a larger, higher resolution display, and an uprated battery. With these powerful specifications, the system seems like it would be the ideal platform for a handheld retro console. In order to run unapproved third-party software on your device, you must first jailbreak it. Jailbreaking is the process of using an exploit to allow for privilege escalation or execution of unsigned code. In the case of the 3DS, the exploit used is a fascinating study in reverse engineering, and the resulting process is well documented, mature, and most importantly, safe. Each 3DS console has a unique 128-bit key stored in the device's flash memory that is used to encrypt software, save files, basically anything stored on the SD card. Unfortunately, brute forcing such a key would take an inordinate amount of time and computing power for the average user. Upon closer inspection, it was found that the first 64 bits were not truly random, but instead were the device's local friend code seed, or LFCS, a value that can be read and extracted from user space. Even with this shortcut, cracking the remaining 64 bits of the device would still be a challenge. Through careful observation, people far more clever than me realized that 32 of the remaining 64 bits were sequential, and further, that they appeared to be based on the device's manufacturing date. This led to the discovery that part of the encryption key was mathematically related to the device's LFCS, plus or minus a small variance. This only leaves 32 bits of the encryption key that are truly random and need to be brute forced. With modern cryptocurrency mining techniques and GPU technology, a 3DS can be cracked wide open in a matter of seconds. Now, I'm not going to show you the entire process, as it's both quite involved and beyond the scope of this video. The step-by-step procedure is spelled out in the 3DS Hacks Guide. Further, the earlier slides on encryption borrowed heavily from a more in-depth discussion, and I've put links to both pages below in the description. The gist of it is that the process has been refined to the point that it's very safe to perform with little chance of bricking your device. With that said, proceed at your own risk. Be aware that Nintendo can ban your device from the network if you're caught cheating online or pirating commercial software. Homebrew, however, has been demonstrated to be completely safe. The jailbreaking process is well over 100 steps in total. In it, you will extract your device's LFCS and utilize a community-supported project called SeedMiner that maintains a crowdsourced GPU farm to mine your device's unique encryption key. You'll then use that key to create an entry point to inject an exploit that allows for installing a custom firmware. Once installed, the firmware allows you to run any third-party software you want and gives you added control over your device, including the ability to change hardware settings, create backups, manipulate the file system, and much more. A vast library of homebrew software exists for the platform, including computer, console, and arcade emulators, utilities, ports from other platforms, media players, demos, and much more. Hundreds of applications are available to install right from a convenient browser, and they'll appear in the 3DS interface alongside your official software titles. So wait, wasn't this supposed to be about the Amiga? Right. Well, now that we have the ability to run third-party software, let's take a look at UAE 3DS. Developed by Bada71, this is a port of the UAE for All from the Dreamcast console. In this guise, it emulates an Amiga 500 running Workbench 1.3 with 2 floppy drives, mouse, and joystick. That should fit our most common use cases nicely, so let's see what it takes to get it running. There are a handful of things we'll need to prepare in advance to make this work. This folder contains all the files that were previously used for the jailbreak process, along with a full system backup of the 3DS should I want to restore it to a known good state later on. Next, we'll need the UAE 3DS installer in CIA format from the project's GitHub page. CIA is a portable installation archive that contains the software and metadata in a format used by the Nintendo eShop. I've also pre-positioned some demos, games, and utility software for the Amiga. Next, we'll need a valid Kickstart ROM, so once again I've turned to Amiga Forever. I'll use the ROM toolbox to export version 1.3 for the Amiga 500, and then rename the file to kick.rom as required by the emulator. I'll also grab a copy of the OS 1.3 boot media from Amiga Forever, which provides the disk in the ADF image format that the emulator can use natively. With that done, I'll mount up the SD card from the 3DS and copy the files over. The software archives get placed in the CIA's directory, which I created during the jailbreak process. Next, I'm going to create a directory named UAE 3DS inside the existing 3DS directory. It's not necessary to create it yourself, as it will show up automatically after installing the software, but I wanted to copy everything all at once instead of piecemeal. The Kickstart ROM must be placed here, but you can put your disk images anywhere you want on the SD card. I've opted to keep it all together as that made the most sense to me. With the requisite software copied to the SD card, we're ready to install and configure our pocket-sized Amiga. The installation process couldn't be any simpler. During the jailbreak, we already installed the tools needed. In this case, we'll be using FBI to install our CIAs. Once the software loads, simply navigate to the CIA's directory on your SD card and choose the option to install and delete all CIA files. FBI will do its thing, and once it completes, we can exit out to the launcher and find our brand new software waiting for us. And there we go, one handheld Amiga ready for action. Let me mount up the Workbench disk so we can see how this thing performs. This is actual speed, no camera tricks. Alright, that wasn't too bad. Feels about right for booting from a floppy. But how cool is this pocket-sized Workbench screen? Pressing the select button brings up the menu at any time. Here, you can mount and unmount either of the two virtual floppy disk drives. There are also a variety of performance settings you can tweak, but I found that leaving them set to auto yielded the best results. There are also controller and keyboard options and a reset button, but it's a far cry from the countless options available in a full UAE implementation. Still, the simplified interface is well thought out and easy to use, with hot buttons assigned to common actions. In this configuration, the analog stick acts as the mouse, with Y and X as the left and right buttons respectively. The D-pad functions as the joystick, with B and A serving as the fire button and up for jump, a nice touch for platformers. You can also use the touchscreen for the mouse input, and it even supports tap and drag, which I've poorly demonstrated here by attempting to double tap instead. Typing on the virtual keyboard is best done with the stylus, but I wouldn't try writing a dissertation on this thing. A really nice feature is the ability to save and restore state at any time. This is especially true when dealing with software that loads from multiple floppy disks. With save states, you only ever need to load a title once, and then you can jump right back into the action in a matter of seconds. Multiple slots are provided for each application, and it even preserves which disk images are mounted. Another nice feature is the super throttle. When you press the start button, the emulator goes into warp speed and skips updating the screen or sound in favor of increasing the processing power. Here, I'll reboot the machine and enable super throttle for comparison. Oh yeah, that's much faster than before. Okay, so we all know that no YouTube Amiga video is complete without showing sysinfo, and who am I to challenge the status quo? No real surprises here. UAE 3DS claims to emulate an A500, and it pretty much does just that. The CPU frequency calculation is messed up, but performance is as expected. The screen is cropped in a way that suggests the video mode used by sysinfo isn't properly supported, although I had no such problems with any other software I tested. So, how is it? Well, about half the software I tried worked reasonably well, but a number of titles did crash the emulator. Keep in mind that this is only version 1.0, so it's possible there may be improvements in the future. The controls are fairly responsive, and the display is nice and sharp. The sound seems suitable, but the system's signature stereo separation is strikingly scarce in this situation. Apart from a few micro stutters, OCS games are completely playable. In fact, the stylus and touchscreen work so well in Lemmings, it's almost as if the game was designed for them. Picking out the right lemming on the tiny screen can be a challenge, but scrolling around the play area is silky smooth with the touchscreen. I'd go so far as to say it's even better than using a mouse on real hardware. No, your audio isn't skipping, that's actually what it sounds like. Demo scene productions tend to push the real hardware to the limit, and as a byproduct, they'll expose any shortcomings in the emulator as well. My observation is that disk access seems to cause most of the lag in UAE 3DS, and as demos are constantly streaming data in the background, they're affected the most. It's also worth noting that I'm using an original 3DS with the dual-core CPU. The later revisions of the hardware have a quad-core clocked 3 times faster and would certainly improve the overall experience. Of course, if the 3DS can emulate an Amiga, it should have no problem with earlier systems, right? As you would expect, emulators exist for everything from the Atari 800 to the ZX Spectrum, including MAME and the C64. Vice 3DS was released by the same developer as UAE 3DS, so you could take your 64 on the go as well. And unlike the pared-down UAE experience, this is the full Vice implementation with all of the myriad configuration options you would normally expect. So there we have it, a handheld Amiga and Commodore 64 that's not just vaporware. It exists, it works, and it implements a bunch of neat features that are well thought out and easy to use. Speaking of which, we have a variety of lovely buttons for you to enjoy, so why not give some of them a try? I hope you enjoyed this bit. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.